All right, Numbers 21, let's call this one a soft answer because that is a proverb that sums up a lot of what would have helped both Israel and its adversaries in this chapter, understanding that a soft answer is not so much what either Israel or its adversaries have become accustomed to offering. Israel, because at this point, once again, this is a link in the chain of complaints that they have lodged against God. And so we are seeing finally God put to rest at least this episode of complaining with the famous story of the bronze serpent. Because going back to Exodus, we have seen that as the children of Israel have grown dissatisfied with their condition, they got used to giving both God and Moses a harsh response. This time, he is going to send serpents among them as they again complain about the food, and to heal them from that, he's going to tell Moses to create a bronze serpent or form a bronze serpent, raise it, and those who look at it will be healed, pointing forward to something we'll see in the New Testament, which will say, as Moses raised the bronze serpent in the wilderness, so Christ must be raised up for the healing of the people. But beyond Israel needing to understand the wisdom in a soft answer, its adversaries needed to understand the same thing. Why? Because as we've heard before, God is not partial. And so he is disciplining both his people and the people who have come against them in the form of Edom back in chapter 20, but he is not going to deal with Edom as harshly now as he will deal with the Canaanites who come out to oppose them, Sihon, the king of, I think it's the Amorites, and then Og, the king of Bashan. At least one of which they will offer a request, a relatively peaceable request to simply pass through and compensate him for anything that they might need to consume along their travels or along their way through. But others are not even going to give them the chance to so much as get a word out, as they're simply going to come out to them and meet them with force. And so understand how a soft answer would have saved these three armies, which the Israelites are going to defeat in response to either the harsh verbal answer or simply the harsh military answer they're going to get for simply wanting to pass through to their promised land, understanding they're not even there yet. And so the wisdom of that proverb in Proverbs 15:1 can be seen in some of our colloquial wisdom. It simply says, you can get more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. And that's talking about, in some ways, just getting your way. How much more in a situation where you could actually have peace? Does it make sense to simply respond when you have the power to say no with a polite response as opposed to a harsh response? Understanding that these three kings are people who have the power over armies. And it's one thing if we're fighting our own battles, but it's another thing when our harsh response has the potential of getting other people harmed. And that's exactly what they do here. When they could have simply given a peaceable, reasonable response, they ended up dragging their people into a situation where they had to pay consequences that the kings might not have had to pay in person. And so I guess the lesson for us is obvious. There are times when if we're fighting our own battles, it just makes enough sense to simply give a reasonable response, even when the response has to be no. But when you're offering a response that actually has consequences for other people, how much more reasonable is it to make sure that we respond with wisdom? Likewise, even though the Edomites are going to get a pass here, understanding that they're essentially going to be described as Israel's brothers, meaning going back to Jacob and Esau, the Edomites are descendants of Esau. But later on, they're not going to check their habit of giving a harsh response either. Understanding the most genuinely heartfelt request for passage seems to go to Edom. God doesn't actually bring them into conflict, but Edom gets in the habit of giving Israel harsh responses, actually partnering with some of Israel's enemies, even though they have a close relationship with Edom historically. And so eventually, because they don't check their tendency to give Israel harsh responses, even though they don't see the same consequences as the Canaanites do, at this point, eventually the same thing's going to happen to them. Eventually, God's going to deal with them for getting in the habit of dealing out harsh responses when a soft response would have done just fine. And so understand a soft response does not mean a weak response. It simply means a wise response. And so to the degree that we can learn from these stories, how God is dealing both with his people and their adversaries, God willing, we will learn the wisdom of offering a soft response, not only for ourselves, but for the people over whom God has given us responsibility. As we say, though, his best as you go forward in him.